bentornati sul canale. Stasera sperimento per la prima volta il microfono, quindi scrivetemi se si sente bene o se non si sente bene. Stasera abbiamo l'opportunità di parlare con un artista inglese d'avanguardia, collaboratore storico di Brian Eno e fondatore della Obscure Records. Stasera, ecco, parliamo con Gavin Bryars. Prossimamente presumo che si genereranno i sottotitoli e comunque chi mastica un po' inglese sicuramente potrà giovare di questa diretta, ecco. Quindi io vi auguro una buona visione e come sempre fatemi sapere se vi è piaciuta. Gavin, hi.
Hello.
Thank you for your time and for your ability.
That's okay.
Okay. Now, I don't want to waste your time. Can you tell us about the new release? I want to enter in the point of the discussion. The new box set of
The new box set
Obscure
of Obscure.
Records.
Yeah.
Yes. Okay.
What do you like to know about them? It's an old record, but they're re-released, right?
The first thing I want to ask, it was founded in 1975. And I want to ask you, the first thing, your first encounter with Brian Eno. Can you tell us where did you meet him?
I met him, though I didn't know him, when he was an art student, probably around 1970, 69 or 70. He used to come to concerts that I gave along with some of my colleagues in London. And he said later that these were a kind of inspiration to him. And he realized there was a lot of contemporary music, which was not like the kind of European avant-garde that you hear in big festivals of avant-garde music. And it could even be quite attractive. And so he knew that. And then later we met more often just after he left college, and he was working for a printer next door to an artist called Tom Phillips, and I used his printer to print some of my scores. So Brian was printing some of my music at that time. This is 1971, 72. Then, of course, he joined Roxy Music and so on, and we stayed in touch. When I moved out of the small apartment I had in West London, he moved into that apartment. So he took my apartment when I left, and by then we were friends. I didn't see him very often because often clearly he was working in studios, always out of the country, but we saw each other from time to time. And in 1973, a friend of mine who produced so-called underground films had the idea of issuing some of the music for these films on record. And he talked with me and Brian about this idea, and we were going to put this to Island Records. But that was suddenly the time of the 1973 war in the Middle East, and lots of shortages of fuel and petrol and so on, which meant that vinyl it was very precious, and they wouldn't use it on experimental projects. So that idea dropped. Then 2 years later, Brian came back with the idea of doing music, but not necessarily that music, in the same way with Island Records, with Chris Brackwell. And he asked me to work with him, to act as a kind of advisor, and for the first album to be of my music, which is one of the thick pieces that he had heard before and which he loved.
Okay, and you was the collaborator of Brian Eno, because if I think about your career begins in the 60s. And I think that your work with Brian Eno begins with the second part of discrete music. Is it right?
That was when I actually worked with him in the sense of working on music with him. We worked together, obviously, on this project in terms of producing things together. But the actual working on the music was on the second part of discrete music, the piece based on the Pachelbel canon. Yes.
Yes. And Gavin, my point of view, when the Obscure Records came out in 1975, your album, can you tell us about the birth of the sinking of the Titanic? Because I think that, Gavin, your music inside this beautiful vinyl, is it the atmosphere of the end of the Titanic? In your mind, there was the thing to put in music the end of this musician on the deck of the Titanic.
That was
Can you tell us about?
Yeah, that was part of the idea, but in fact, in reality, the piece dates from 1969, quite a long time before this. Just
Okay.
after I came back from America, and I was working in an art college, and I was trying to make something which was like the musical equivalent of conceptual art. That is to say, music which was about ideas, not just sounds. And I had this idea for something which could be a piece called The Sinking of the Titanic. And I wrote a series of notes, and this series of notes became a kind of score that you could read, and somehow in your mind you could imagine the music.
Okay.
So it's a strange kind of imaginary piece. And then one day there was a promoter in London who said, "Okay, Gavin, that's fine, but what would it sound like if you did make it sound from your imagination?" So then I had to make a live piece, which I did in 1972. And that's the concert that Brian came to, where I did not only Jesus Titanic live for the first time, but Jesus Blood live for the first time. Jesus Blood live for the first time was 72, December 1972. Those two pieces were in the concert, and Brian was there. And so that's where that piece came from. The idea of the Titanic was based on the ship's final moments of the ship sinking, and especially the behavior of the ship's band, the musicians.
Yes.
But more and more, I involved other ideas and other speculations and information about the ship, about performance aspects of the ship, about, for example, what music the band played when they went down, but also what music they played before the ship hit the iceberg, about the kind of sounds that the ship made when it hit the iceberg, the sounds it made when it was going down, about underwater sounds in general, about certain things that the ship had, like it had a very strange microphone built into the ship which could hear underwater bells. There's all kinds of things which I got to know through looking at designs for the ship, reports about the ship, and also with interviewing survivors. So I spoke to people now, at that time, old ladies who'd been on the ship in 1912. This was like 60 years later. And I spoke to them, and they told me about their experience. So all these things became part of a kind of construction which became the piece. And the instrumentation I used was that of the band on the ship, say 6 string players. They had two pianists as well, but at the end, there were no pianos on the top deck, so they can't be in the music at that stage.
In this album, The Singing of the Titanic, Brian Eno was there or was outside the production of this album? It was a supervisor or not?
Of the recording of the album, yeah, Brian produced all 10 albums of Obscure.
Okay.
Every time he was there. I mean, he was like Manfred Eicher at ECM. He was at every album. In 1975, we did 4 albums, the first 4, and we originally planned to do 4 a year. Eventually, Brian was working a lot away. There was a time when he was working in Berlin with David Bowie. So that sometimes we couldn't reach him, and he had to really deal with the record company, so we couldn't do it without him. So, but by over 3 years, we did 10 records, which is not bad. We did
Not bad.
we did, yeah, and then we could have done more. There were more ideas. I mean, I kept feeding him more ideas, and we talked about them. But by then, he was away doing other things. I was doing other things. So that was it. That was it. That was the end. It had a very short life, but I advised him with Michael Nyman on the repertoire for most of the albums, and we worked on them together with Brian.
It was a shame because Obscure Records, in my point of view, when I was very young, maybe 12 years, I was 12 years, and I found it on a record shop. Now the record shop are dead, and I buff Discrete Music. It was a remaster. The particular thing I've seen on this label and on these vinyls was the cover art, very simple, very minimalist. And in my point of view, from 1975 to 1978, it was the life of this label. I want to ask you, what was the aim of this label? I mean, your focus was to promote musician, not in the stream, in the mainstream, but I think that very particular musician like Michael Nyman or Penguin Cafe Orchestra.
Or Harold Budd and other people like that. These were people who themselves were not in the mainstream of music.
Okay.
But in a way, we were not really particularly promoting them because the work of the record label was not a very big public one. They were very hard to find.
Yes.
They were not very well distributed at the beginning. You could only get them by mail order. They were not in the shops for a long time, and not many were made because it wasn't a priority for Island Records. It was Brian's project, but he was recording with Island Records, so they supported him. And many people didn't like them at all. With the musicians, for example, who I employed on Jesus Blood, hated the music and said they didn't want their names to be on the label because it would damage their careers. It was music which was not particularly comfortable for many professional musicians. But we found, and it was, as I say, you didn't find it very easily. As you say, you found it in your record store. And it was often in smaller record stores rather than the bigger ones. If it was in a bigger one, it might be in some small corner. I don't know. It might be in Easy Listening or something crazy like that. I don't know. But it was not a big promotion. And so, in a way, the people who did find it valued it very highly. There's a lot of people for whom, like you, it was an important discovery. And in a way, the word obscure for the label gives that idea that, in a way, by searching for something and you find it like in the dark, and when you find it, you value it much more highly than if it's come to you very, very easily. That was part of the concept in a way. We were very poor at marketing. In fact, we were the opposite of marketing. We were concealing the music a lot of the time in the darkness and behind this dark cover, and we didn't do any advertising. There was some, I think, one or two reviews, but not many. And so then later, so these 3 years, the albums came out. Initially these 4, then another 3 came out, then the final 4 came out, and then the final 3 came out, and that was it. But then later, 1 or 2 were reissued on CD, not all of them, different labels, different countries, but the idea of the set of Obscure as a single entity was never explored until now. And there in Italy, Luciano has produced this concept. I worked with him for maybe a couple of years, and I've helped him. He needed some help to, for example, to find the people, who owns the rights to these records, and many of them are no longer alive.
Master tapes and everything.
All that, the things like some things we had to remaster from albums themselves, but some things had been remastered. But also in terms of who owned the rights to things, sometimes it was their children, sometimes they'd sold the rights to another publishing company, some are with big companies, and we had to get them back from those people. It was difficult, and Luciano persisted, and I helped him, and I, talked to people so that he could achieve what he wanted to do, which was to bring these albums back to life as a whole, and to put them in this box set, both as vinyl and a CD, but also they have the original notes, they have the original designs, but then they also have a very good booklet with interviews and articles and photographs. And I think it's a very beautiful production. I think he's done a wonderful job.
Yes, it is very important now for this kind of music. I think that because now the music are dead in my point of view, and if some people discover this kind of music, it is very important to evolve, because if you are a classical listener, you have to enjoy this music. And if you are a musician like you and like me, it is very important to hear the difference between a strange kind of music, not strange, very, I don't know the word, not strange, very minimalist music, very different from the mainstream. And I want to ask you,
say, rather than being strange, I would say it's unorthodox. It's not
yes,
conventional.
It's not conventional, right, Gavin? The right thing, not conventional, but it is very easy to hear if you are a good listener or a good musician, because I think that, in my point of view, and I think that you are an idol for me, the mainstream music is not same good, different from the unconventional music. If I think that the work of David Top, or I think about the Penguin Cafe Orchestra, for me, when I was 12 years, was very different. In my case, my father gave to me some good music from 3 years until now. Now
you had a very good father.
Yes, because on the 7th of February, I will do my 39 years old. But when I was 3 years old, my first album was Revolver from Beatles. And in the birthday, a happy birthday, Gavin, because 2 years ago, it was your birthday.
2 days ago, yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
You are young. True. You are young, Gavin. You are young.
Yeah, I'm only 25. Yeah.
I'm only 25. And I want to ask you this. You said before that so many musicians, very important musician, works on this album. Can you recall so many people, or you can't talk about it?
Yeah, I can remember almost everything. There were some albums I wasn't so heavily involved with. I wasn't very involved with the Penguin Cafe, for example. That was an idea that Brian had. I was involved with Harold Budd because I was a person who I brought the tapes to Brian so he could hear Harold, and it was a result of that Harold came and worked with Brian, and Similar with John White, with the very early piece of John Adams, for example, who I'd worked with in California in 1973. Those are things I brought. Similar, but sometimes people would send in tapes for Brian to listen to, and we'd listen to them together. So we'd make the decision that something neither of us heard before was very interesting. That happened, for example, with Jan Steele and with Max Eastley. Those people I hadn't heard, but what they sent us was really very interesting and very beautiful. So a lot of that was, a kind of collective listening and discovery for us too.
It is a wonderful story, because I think that I can imagine you and Brian Eno listen to these tapes. It was very magical, because if I think about you and Brian Eno listening the classical recordings of the Penguin Cafe Orchestra, in my point of view, the first album, it is very, very good. And I want to say these albums of the obscure records, first press, have a good value. Very, very, very expensive.
Right.
The first press, if you find it, if you find it on a classical market, on the in same thing, it is very, very high level of money, because as you said, is not mainstream. It is very dark. It is very for people who knows music.
That's
And it is very
really-
important.
It's quite funny, because I have some of the original albums and they're still in their wrapping paper. I haven't opened them.
Oh, maybe I think that the sinking of the Titanic.
Well, we'd have to have an auction, and maybe I'd become a millionaire.
Yes. If you think about discrete music or sinking of the Titanic, in your kind of take it, you take care of his vinyl. First press, mint. It is the good word mint. Instead, never. Never open.
It's never been played.
Okay. Very, very high level of money, because it is very important. But in your case, it is a memory. It is a good memories of the obscure records.
Sure.
And Gavin, I want to ask you now, future projects. Can you tell us about new project?
New project for me?
Yes.
I'm all the time doing new projects. I've just finished a harpsichord quintet from Mahan Esfahani, a great Iranian harpsichord player. I'm working actually in Italy. My son and I are composing together the music for the artist Massimo Bartolini's installation at the Venice Biennale. I worked with him in Prato on a big exhibition. So I work with him. I'm doing a lot of touring this year with the dance music that I did for Merce Cunningham's ballet Biped. My group, including me and my son, are playing in many places. I think at one point we are in Italy, in Ravenna in June, and in Rome in September. So we will come to Italy, and we may have maybe a concert of my ensemble when we're in one of those cities. It's quite possible. All these things have been discussed, but the dance performances are there, and I have more commissions for the future as well. So basically, I've just got to stay alive. That's the main thing,
But you're young, Gavin. There's no problem.
I know.
You're an idol. And Gavin,
you know that saying, "The good die young."
No, only the good and young. And Gavin, I want to ask you one of my best albums, another one. Can you recall the recording session of Decay Music of Michael Nyman?
Oh, Decay Music.
Yes.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I wasn't in the studio for that, though. In fact, I was at the first performance when he did it. It was in a concert in 1972 or 73. So I remember we went on the bus together, me, Michael, and his wife, and one child, and his wife was actually pregnant with the second child. And yeah, we went. I remember the concert of that. That was, in a way, he was trying to make a kind of process music, which related somewhat to the American minimalists like Steve Reich, because both Michael and I, and two other English musicians, worked with Steve Reich in 1972. We toured with him playing drumming. So it was his response to kind of minimal music. And at that time, he was actually writing his book on experimental music too.
It's very important to talk with a musician like you. And now, Gavin, you have the contact. Sometimes you talk with Brian Eno or not.
Sometimes I always call him on his birthday and I sing "Happy Birthday to You." And if he's not there, he has it on his voicemail. Then if he has it on his voicemail, if he hasn't heard it, he always sends me a message back and said how beautiful it was, even though my singing might be terrible.
You are a terrible singer.
Yeah, terrible singer. But
Like me.
But we occasionally see each other, maybe not regularly, but there may be some time where we find out each other at the same event, or we're working maybe on some sort of, I don't know, radio program or something. We're together, and we get on well. I mean, there was a time when Brian and I fell out with each other. It was as a problem that, like, nobody who recorded on Obscure at the time had any contracts. So it meant that nobody got any money, of course, it didn't bother us at the time. But then there were some of the people in the Obscure who got a bit later, became annoyed, and so it was difficult. And so that Brian and I didn't see each other for quite a long time. And then I think it was 2009, I was playing in a festival in Norway, and I saw that Brian was at the same festival. And I thought, oh dear. But then I said, well, maybe we won't see each other. When I arrived, I got into the hotel, took my bags to my room. I came out and I got into the elevator. The elevator was coming down and Brian was in the elevator. So we went down the elevator together. We started to speak. We had a few drinks. We had dinner together. We flew back together on the same plane, sitting next to each other. And it was just like old times. And so, all that sort of intervening time was forgotten. And I would say we're good friends. And Brian has been very helpful with this project of Luciano's to do the issue, because although it's not a big thing in his life, because he's done many big things, for him, he thinks it's still a very important one, something in a way which he learnt a lot from and which meant a lot to him at the time. And he still thinks that historically it has some importance, and he realizes that.
It is an important musician and producer. And I want to ask you the last question. And what about the Portsmouth Sinfonia? Can you tell us about
well, I
the
was
birth
involved.
of this Sinfonia, of this classical ensemble, classical orchestra?
You make it sound a very fine orchestra. Of course, it was. But I was at the beginning there. I was the founder with some of my fellow with some of the students who were working with me. I was teaching in Portsmouth at an art school, and I was doing all sorts of music projects with them, music of John Cage, of ideas from art like Fluxus and those kind of things. Then one day we were talking over some coffee, and we had an idea. Let's have an orchestra, make an orchestra. And eventually, for the first time when we played, there were 13 people. None of them really played music at all. I mean, a little bit. One or two could read music. And one or two had instruments, but we had to buy instruments. I bought a euphonium. Other people had a saxophone. And then we had to decide what to play. And because they were not trained musicians, the music they knew was only, if you like, popular classical music that maybe that they'd heard from TV shows or whatever. And so we did Rossini William Tell Overture because that was the theme music for a cowboy show on TV. And we played it just in a performance in the college. And it was crazy. And then a bit later, we did the Scratch Orchestra in London did a performance around Beethoven. So we did a performance of Beethoven's Fifth Symphony, which lasted about 5 minutes. And then little by little, we'd played other art colleges, so we had more things. But none of us, we never practiced. We didn't rehearse. So we never got any better. And we were very bad at the beginning. And eventually Brian joined us. And then, of course, Brian had the connections with the record industry. So he persuaded Transatlantic Records to issue an album. So we did a studio recording of an album, the first one, of the Portsmouth Sinfonia, and which was, people found, shall we say, a little bit startling. It was not what they expected, shall we say, if you see what's on the label. You see this label that says Richard Strauss, Beethoven, Schubert. You can recognize them, but it's not very good. And it's not very long. And then we did a very big concert at the Albert Hall in London, which is a big venue. And we did that as a live concert. And there were about maybe 3,000 people there. And we recorded that. And then eventually there was, I think there's an album by a famous English classical orchestra. I think it might have been the London Symphony Orchestra, which was of rock classics. And we heard this, and we decided this was the worst orchestra in the world. And we thought there can't be a worse orchestra in the world than us. So we decided we do our rock classics so we could be, again, the worst orchestra. And we stayed together for maybe 10 years, maybe. I think about 1981 was about the last time we played together. And we never really stopped. It just disappeared. All the people who were in it are still around, but we've never got back together again, and I don't think we will. Every now and again, someone will make a suggestion, but it never happens. But I think there's someone. I just had an email the other day that someone in America wants to do a box set of the 3 Portsmouth Sinfonia albums, which is. That's a slightly different proposition from obscure. I mean, obscure is much more serious. And but I think, the Portsmouth Sinfonia was crazy, and we were serious about what we do. We're not fooling around. We were just terrible, which made it very funny a lot of the time.
I think that maybe in the future a box set of Portsmouth Sinfonia came out.
It should do.
It is very important to remain alive this kind of music
I
because
think
now
maybe you should suggest to Luciano that's his next project.
can I suggest it to him? Maybe if he can search, find the master tapes, maybe it can be do it.
I think there is someone in America who's just made a proposal to do that, and I'm not involved. I mean, I'm in contact, but it's one of my ex-students who runs all the business of the Sinfonia, who was there with me at the beginning. He takes care of all these discussions, and we talk together. So if a project comes up, we'll talk about it. And someone asked only a few days ago about the possibility, and it seems to be serious. So we'll see. Who knows?
Gavin, thank you for your time.
Thank you.
It was a pleasure to speak with you.
I finally got hold of the technology, even though it's only my phone.
No, but there's no problem because so many streams I've done on my channel, so many people use the smartphone, and it's better, and it's better from the laptop.
Yeah, sure.
S-
Okay.
So, Gavin, thank you for your time. Take care and stay in contact.
Thank you.
And bye. I will salute my audience. Grazie a tutti, è stato un onore e ditemi come si è sentito tutto. Bye Gavin, see you soon.
Ciao.
Bye.
Ciao. Ciao.
Ciao, ciao.